Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk. It's Sunday morning in the UK today, and I have the pleasure of having a discussion with some friends. The name of the talk is Challenging Situations and When How They Can Support Self-Development. When and how challenging situations can support self-development. So today we'll be talking about group work for self-development. And how can one talk about group work without referring to encounter groups, here and now groups, T groups, circling, and authentic relating? So we will draw from our experiences of those. Today's talk is a conversation amongst 5 individuals, most of whom have been passionately involved in the encounter group scene influenced by the ideas of Carl Rogers, and 2 of which have also been deeply involved in here and now groups. And today, for convenience, I will be using that term, here and now, groups, just for convenience, as an umbrella name for T groups, circling, and authentic relating. This probably makes sense only in the UK. It wouldn't make much sense in America. So, and also I would refer to these 4 groups, here and now, T groups, circling, and authentic relating, as focus-driven, focus-based groups. Again, that's debatable as well. So I will be using the term here and now groups or focus-based groups. And when I will be saying that, I will be referring to T group, circling, and authentic relating. Only because it would be offering us an opportunity to compare those modalities with modalities such as encounter groups, which rest on the idea of non-directivity. So non-directivity versus focus-based. So some of the listeners might be familiar with Sarah Ness, who does a very brilliant job in outlining, gathering both the history of circling and authentic relating. She does say that in her webpage, circlingguide.com/history of circling, she does say that the histories as well as theories pretty much overlap. So I'm going to quote Sarah Ness from her website. Quote, not everyone agrees on what circling really is, and there is still some controversy regarding what some people do under the circling brand. Sarah goes, I define circling as any practice of unwithheld, so non-withheld, present moment connection to self and others, particularly when it involves an agreement. I note the word agreement around welcome everything, aka surrender. I note the word surrender. And my comment would be, how can there be surrender without trust? And I believe this is already a big potential difference, because trust is a very big deal for person-centered practitioners and attendees of encounter groups. Not something that we can display the first time we join a group, but I often felt in circling circles that atmosphere of surrender from the very first time. So that attracted me to circling. I wasn't experiencing that ability to surrender prior to that in person-centered groups. But again, I'm very much generalizing. This introduction is gonna finish in 2 minutes. Sarah continues. Also, the all circling carries an explicit focus on getting each other walls. Very, very similar to person-centered groups. So these two approaches are perhaps 95% similar, but that 5% difference in focus, again, she mentioned focus, an explicit focus on getting each other's walls. And I wonder whether person-centered practitioners have that explicit focus. They see that as an explicit focus, getting each other walls. Sarah ends this introduction saying, without that, the group is only for self-expression or emotional discharge. So it's not circling. It's like saying without connection is not circling, because self-expression, from what she's saying, or emotional discharge would not be aiming at connection. So this is what I would call guidelines. Two more quotes from an authentic relating reputable website, where their guidelines include own your own experience, so ownership language, speak from the I, self-revealing, welcome everything and assume nothing. Again, welcome everything and assume nothing is a big deal for me as a person-centered practitioner, because if I might go defensive and assume that somebody might not have the best intentions in that moment, or not being enough self-aware. So I suppose this is another area of potential exploration, the ability of assuming nothing. So easily, I suppose. And from a Circling Europe website, I want to quote, the connection is the focus of the group, and it invites a form of self-responsible adults relating. And that surrender is being just part of the wider intelligence being generated in the group field. So a trust in a wider intelligence. So there's a lot in there I appreciate. But the final part about a trust in a wider intelligence, I wonder if I can open up to the group on this particular topic. I relate to that. This wider intelligence speaks to me. In a group, I often feel a presence that is not me or somebody else, but seems to be the spirit of the group. Some people may call it Locus. And these modalities refer to a wider intelligence in the group. And obviously, once you think that there's a wider intelligence, that might influence how you relate to one another. So I just wondered, I would like to put to the group whether you see, you relate to this wider intelligence or whether you see a group as individuals coming together.
I think I see it a little broader, wider than only individuals. So I resonate with the wider intelligence and trusting what I kind of stepping into the unknown, I guess. And and I see it as different levels of like me, JR, or Jan, the person, and there's something underneath that maybe. That spirit comes and a kind of the person is consists of different parts, I guess. And also, I think you referred to development, and I think trust is essential for doing this kind of explorations. And I also, for myself, it's very crucial that I have a high degree of self-leadership, so I don't kind of, so I can be present and in the here and now and feel into sensations and feelings and observe my thinking. And I think also the share like noticing of tendencies of withholding or revealing is kind of the core for me as different contexts of group relating. And I also want to say that, or maybe I can say one more thing. I think in order for me to be with what people bring into the room, I think it's I have to trust myself so I can be respectful and sensitive enough to what other brings in. And for me that looks like leading into my edges, I guess, and noticing boundaries and kind of self-inquire in the moment, why does this people or this group kind of trigger me in this and that way. So for me, it's a high degree of like ownership, as you mentioned too. And I think that's also kind of to be willing to step into the unknown. That's kind of stepping over a threshold. I think that's where authentic development can happen, and that takes a lot of trust in the group. So maybe this was too much, but okay. Thank you.
Oh, that was very helpful. Thank you, Jan.
I'd like to return to the idea of this sort of group intelligence. It's certainly something I've experienced, and it happens for me, it happens by degrees. The greater my trust in myself and the group, then I'm at a certain point, if I am in trust in my process and with the group, I experience something that seems larger than just the sum of people within the group. So that's my feeling about what, or that's how I might connect with this idea of group intelligence. So as a sort of the group entity that I also encounter, as well as the individual. Yeah, and that does run parallel with my trust, my trust of myself to step in and encounter the other, and my trust for the group as a whole. That tends to develop it in sort of parallel with my consciousness of the group intelligence, as it were. So I hope I'm being clear there.
Both you and Jana mentioned trust. It strikes me as very central in both of your sharings.
Yeah, but I'm aware of that as a very fluid process within myself, and I can't predict how that will be when I enter into group. And it's part of that process is yeah, it's a very alive process for me. I'm aware of when I meet my boundaries, when I meet something in the other that touches that part of myself that doesn't trust or does trust. And I'm losing my thread here as I'm talking, but yeah, so trust as something that for me, when I'm in group, it's a bit nebulous. So I can be in trust and I can very quickly be out of trust, and that awakens something of my own process for me about why I'm not trusting, or why I might feel defensive or withdraw or begin to hide within the group process.
It's a very fluid and dynamic process. And it's almost like this trust could shift throughout the group's duration. And what's your sense of agency, and how much is sometimes does it feel like, what comes up for me is I wonder how much does it feel that like a power in my own experiences. Sometimes I feel like, yes, I have my agency, but I also feel a power from the group. So do I trust that thing that it's outside of my agency, and how does my agency interact with that power or wider intelligence that sometimes might trigger me, like Jan was saying, was referring to things that trigger him. So that wider intelligence could trigger me, does trigger me at times. That's when trust becomes more difficult.
I'm sitting with this notion of kind of the level of activation that like if I'm step into a group being dysregulated or not well regulated enough, my trust goes down, and then also my openness and willingness to be authentic, or not authentic, but my willingness to to be with what is declining rapidly. So I think there's something to say about activation, and also I saw you, Cindy, was like you were speaking and you were going back and forth, and I perceived it as kind of at the level of leaning in or contact and like withdrawing. And I think that's also like our own responsibility, how much. I know for me that if I lean in too much, I can kind of lose my agency sometimes. So, and for me, that's very like kinesthetic, and so I can kind of use my. I'm not sure why I'm saying all this, but I think the notion of contact and activation is highly related to trust. That's why I'm saying all this, I think.
Could I check what you mean by leaning too much? When you said, if I lean too much, I may lose some agency.
Yeah, I guess like if I can say it in another way, if I get like too activated, I can start to leave parts of myself that I can notice afterwards that, oh shit, what happened? I felt like I was revealing too much, or I didn't keep my boundaries and respected myself. So something around that, I guess.
Something about the intensity of activation, but also the direction of activation outside of me and within me.
Yeah, and I guess I imagine that we all have different preferences and how we experience kind of relating, or where like the place we come from with all the intentions or whatever we're at. I'm not sure if I'm making sense now.
So we're all different. We could be triggered by different things, and we focus on different things, I guess, and turned on by different things.
Something came up for me about the nature of my perception of group intelligence when you were speaking about the power of group intelligence, Francesco, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, did you say something about sometimes you feel the power of it, and it can be big, or that power becomes quite intense?
Yes, I must be honest that when I said that, yes, struggling with my agency to counterbalance that power and losing a bit of my agency, and or feeling, I suppose it feels like feeling frustrated about my inability. I perceive like there's a sense in which there's very little I can do to shift this. This is where the group's at. This is where the group intelligence is. But I suppose when that group intelligence is activated by fear, or like somebody might have said something outrageous that might have really upset another person, so the group intelligence would sort of I don't mean gang up against that particular individual, but get very alerted and focuses on that individual as somebody that might be doing something unfair. yeah, maybe a sense of judgment, maybe a sense of blame coming from the group intelligence. So if in those moments, I guess, when the group is activated by fear, it feels to me, but I'm judging, I realize, less like group intelligence, but more like group survival instincts.
Thank you for clarifying, because I realize my own experience and my concept of group intelligence is much more related to that sense of something I get when there's cohesion, when there's safety, and when there's trust. So that sort of group intelligence is something of a, if I were to describe it in a kind of sort of with movement, it would be moving up into something that's actually coming out of defensiveness, and it is moving into sort of deeper connection and trust. So I feel the lack of group intelligence when when you're describing, say, an instance where there's a person that or a sense that the group might be turning against someone, I don't feel the group intelligence in that moment. I can be aware of other people's reactions and my own intense reaction, but in that moment, I feel actually quite disconnected. I might be noticing that there might be other people exhibiting similar, what I perceive as something similar to me, but I'm guessing at that point. I'm not. So in my experience, the group power that's related to intelligence has more to do with trust and less with, there's a different quality, is what I think what I'm trying to express here. There's a different quality to those two experiences. Yeah.
Right. Yes. I'm also uncertain whether I should, they are different. I suppose for the first time, I labeled them as one as group intelligence and the other one as group survival instinct. Yes, they do feel different, and I have no idea whether they can actually be grouped under one umbrella name.
I'd just like to correct something. I realize that for me, the group intelligence isn't a rising up, it's more of a dropping down into, as I checked in with myself there. It's a letting go and a being in contact. So yeah, there's a difference in that quality of that experience for me. So
right. With the surrender is a big one for circling, authentic relating, T groups and here and now groups. And that surrender, is surrender a fit word for that dropping down? Surrender, I suppose, is the most Cindy. I just wonder whether that was fitted with your description of letting your guard down. You didn't say guard, to be fair.
Surrender, it's more active than that, than surrender. Surrender to me suggests a sort of, almost like a parachute jump or something, that sort of sensation. It's more of a settling into an active, conscious dropping down. That would fit more for me than surrender. Surrender sounds like free fall to me. So that it's a tiny difference in, but yeah, doesn't quite get it for me.
Tiny but potentially essential difference.
I'd like to comment on as you were saying, is in what did you say? The quality of the experience, and what came up for me in accordance to the higher or the lower or whatever group intelligence is the high is struggling with the it's a high degree of flow, I guess, in the field that is kind of like everybody kind of is participating in a way that feels welcoming and not like sharp, in a way that everything is kind of evolving and emerging. I think so. Yeah, I guess a high degree of flow and does something to, according to cognitive science, is what makes meaning actually a sense of flow, and a high degree of that. I think that's where we can go into that every participant and what they're bringing is kind of cohesive, I guess, and that everybody brings something, but it's kind of fitting or appropriate for the feel of it, or something like that. And I also want to kind of comment on the fear, and I guess also, like you mentioned, Francesco, that if we come from a place, or it can be frightening to be in that flow and kind of letting go or drop down or surrender, and or what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also has to be welcomed and held with respect, and not make it wrong in a way. And that's where I guess boundaries and the willingness to be open and transparent when that happens is crucial, because the flow can be, as you also mentioned, super powerful to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what's driving the flow or the field is kind of a distinction about, like, I think that's what came up for me listening to both of you.
I'm gonna make another generalization here, but what attracted me to the here and now circling, authentic relating, T groups was that that dynamic sense of flow, yeah, which is how you describe group intelligence, that there seemed to be a shared ambition or a shared focus to get there. So that was sort of fast-tracked because of, I know it's not a great term, it's not a very flattery term, but I appreciated the opportunity to show up and to get to that sense, to spend most of the group time in that dynamic sense of flow. But that also made me think that I got attracted by these modalities in my mid-30s, mid to late 30s, whereas person-centered theory and also left-wing politics prior to that were my cup of tea. And and I relate. And I know this is a big jump in this conversation, but that says a lot about my past with low confidence, shyness, and mistrust of institutions. So for me, person-centered theory was, and it still is, the best approach. I'm about to say when I feel vulnerable or when I felt vulnerable. But certainly my perception of myself as an underdog or somebody that may have been unfairly treated, person-centered was a place where I wasn't requested to surrender and trust. The person in front of me was gaining my trust throughout a series of meetings, and that trust and non-directivity played a crucial role in that context, because the person was completely based on my experience. And then 2 years of group work, person-centered group work, really allowed me to transform me into a more integrated person in my early 30s. And I just wonder whether there's two different, perhaps certain modalities attracts different individuals. I don't know if this question is resonates or is fascinating enough, or if you start still dealing with the shock of my big jump from one topic to another.
I can resonate with almost everything, like left wing and not trusting institutions, and I think it's so much to say about the cultural conditioning we receive that makes this kind of work or person-centered and self-image and stuff like that is kind of part of everything. I think like being conditioned into this modern society. And I also heard you or how I'm like, I think there's so much to say about acceptance from others, and also the trust goes along with acceptance, I guess. And whether we like it or not, we have a kind of a presentation of how we show up, I guess, in a certain degrees. We're not completely authentic all the time. There's something to be said about the focus or the person-centered way of relating. I think the problem can be like if we are too person-centered and we go into stories all the time, and we can kind of like get stuck on a narrative in how I see myself or how others see myself. I think that can create a kind of a incongruence with how I feel inside or how I show up out like externally. I think that's where leaning into the unknown comes in as a maybe an antidote of like being too concerned about my self-image or something. I guess I just wanted to elaborate on what you were saying, Francesco.
Also, something about the difference between self-development and therapy comes up for me.
Off the back of that, there's a couple of things that struck me. Jan, you used the word emergence a while ago, and then you spoke about acceptance. And Francesco, when you drew in these sort of new themes, I can't escape from my sense that it is emergence. It comes about for me through trust and being accepted and accepted by myself, and how I perceive that others, I think others are accepting me, and that facilitates my emergence. And when I think about the difference between the here and now, or the more sort of focused groups, and the person-centered approach, I find them very difficult to unpick. Can
I just, difficult to on what?
To separate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right. For me, it's a matter of sort of intensity, I guess. Degrees of intensity, and Jan, when you spoke about people, you know, being sort of having this sort of narrative way of relating, and my feeling is that for myself, if I'm entering into the narrative, I'm trying to manage my environment and give some context so that it can become a safer space for me to enter without it. So what that brings up for me is that in my experience, I feel people are always doing their best in a way that's most safe for them. I can find it. I experience it sometimes as a bit of sort of a smoke screen, and I can feel impatience in myself to get beyond that. But then what that raises for me is, am I putting my needs in front of theirs? So it gets complicated, and it touches something about my needs versus the other person's need for to step in at their pace.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you're making about the distinction, and how I like the word smokescreen, because it's more, and also like sometimes you need to manage that and step into narratives can be a lot less challenging instead of like dropping in and like exploring the consciousness or whatever. So I think I just wanted to point out when it's too much, like to a degree, like if we're not willing to drop our narrative, maybe self-development is not the thing we like want to do or something. It's just like yeah.
Right, yeah, but I don't want to be boxing things up too much, but it's almost like you're saying there might be a boundary between self-development and therapy, and a more therapeutic group would be needed until holding on to narratives is essential to that person, and stepping into self-development. But then we could be arguing whether there's self-development with more degrees of acceptance. And that's, I think, what Cindy was saying. To her, it sounds like for you, Cindy, the gap, the line is much more blurred and much more gradual. The intensity variations. And yet, sometimes we see clashes in group because one person expects a higher degree of intensity. I suppose with the high acceptance, Jan, what you're saying, and non-directivity and unconditional positive regard, the person's storytelling would not get challenged in the group. So I'm talking about the group only. There would be a lower degree of challenges to whichever process the group is going. So if you look at the river, the more focus-driven groups, you get more sort of people stepping in and molding things, whereas the more person-centered group with acceptance is a much more gentle. The direction of the river is much more gentle and accepting of wherever this river is going. I don't know if that's fair.
I think it's for me right now, it's like I'm back to the like, how can I lean into my edges? Maybe today or right now I can do it, and maybe I don't have the capacity of stepping into the river right now. And I think that's something I see that as an aspiration of a way of being, I guess, and to check in constantly with myself, and yeah, and also sometimes we need context, like you were saying, Cindy, and that can be very clarifying and helpful for ourselves, and also yeah, I'm sitting also with a curiosity about if Susie is still here, and if she wants to share or something.
Maybe, yes, Susie can type in the chat. I think she might have a preference to just communicate that way. So you have, yeah, if you wish. I will be keeping an eye on the chat as well. You can also raise your hand if you want us. So this feedback is that it's been an interesting conversation and she's listening. Nice to know you're participating with us. I guess the aspiration, I feel that those modalities which I grouped under here and now, circling ART groups, share an aspiration. There's a focus, whether it's towards, connection or sense of flow, dynamic sense of flow. It could vary across the spectrum what the focus is, but what Cindy, what you said about the something that seems necessary and sufficient for you, the feeling accepted, and what came up to me is almost like a ritual, a group, you know, paying respect to each other. It's almost like a ritual that needs to be taken place each and every time, cannot be taken for granted. It needs to be gained. Your trust needs to be gained by the group. And it feels very different than, oh, I'm showing up because I want this. I want self-development and I want to be in a dynamic sense of flow, and I'm just going to surrender. I know I will surrender regardless. What Cindy said felt, the quality of it felt very different than that. And I relate to both, but like I said, in the first 35 years of my life, I related to Cindy's wording there. And I know that whatever you said there is not representative of you, but just of this particular topic, right? But I related to that particular sharing of yours the first 35 years of my life. And then when I became, I suppose, much more confident, whichever modalities that offer me the opportunity to get to self-development, to fast track self-development, give me that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an image that just came up for me then of being in the here and now groups can sometimes feel like ripping off a plaster. And in Encounter group, it's more you know, a slow unwinding of a bandage at my choice of speed. I don't know if that. Yeah, that's what came up for me. Yeah, yeah. I feel that whatever group I'm in, there's always an internal conversation with me about how I'm meeting the other, and how, so my own willingness to sort of, to use your words, self-development, you know, to unpeel and show up, to take the, it feels like a, you know, a sort of a more risky, active kind of way of being in the group. I'm losing my thread now. I had it. It was kind of there. One of those. So yeah. So always, whether I'm being more active in that meeting in the group and perhaps being revealing of myself in ways that feels very risky for me, there's a constant conversation happening with sort of touching on, does this trespass over my need to recognize the other person? Does it trespass on, so I'm talking about UPR here, and empathy. Does it somehow trespass my need to show up? Does that trespass on somebody else, and how painful I imagine that might be for them, my showing up? So that's a very it's a very lively conversation that I enter into, and what that wakes up for me is how much is it my responsibility, somebody else's response to something, and is there something in me that tells me that, oh, they won't be able to manage that somehow, so I'm not honoring their own ability to self-regulate and to manage for themselves. If I'm sorry, this is sounding, I'm not being very articulate here. I'm trying to articulate something that's a sort of sense of mine, so it's a little bit difficult, but something about my perception of somebody else's ability to manage, and my need to rescue them or think that they're not capable. So their autonomy versus mine in that moment when I reveal something that could potentially be tricky for them. or I perceive it might be tricky for them, or hurtful or painful. So these concepts of UPR and empathy and the power of the other, these are very tangled for me at times.
Caring comes up for me. You didn't use that though. You didn't say that.
That's helpful, thank you. That's a good word.
Another thing that comes up, but this won't make justice to what you said, but it's the way you like to be treated. You will ideally like to be treated by or welcomed or seen and respected and interacted with, feels similar to the way you consider others' needs and resilience. There seems to be a consistency there, although you are questioning, am I sometimes not being myself in the fear of not respecting autonomy? So there seems to be like a caring instinct, but that could get in the way of your respect for their autonomy. But what it felt to me is like, why is Cindy questioning that? Isn't that very consistent though? You're treating others the way you want to be treated. So that seemed fair.
I think the word trust is coming up for me again. So if I'm in group and there's what I perceive to be a deeper level of trust, I can then take myself into those spaces where I reveal parts of me or elements of my experiencing that might be more tricky for somebody else to experience, or I might think it might be more tricky for them because it might be about another person. So if there's that bridge of trust, I can go to those spaces and here it is. So I can trust them to know that I'm talking about my experience rather than them, I guess. And for them to be able to deal with whatever comes up to in relation to that. So I feel I'm being a bit abstract here, but
I'm following you well. That's very helpful.
I guess what showed up for me is how I heard you, Cindy, was the level of vulnerability in showing up or revealing, and I think that's if you choose, like, it's something to do with the distinction of choosing to be vulnerable instead of like collapsing and into somebody's lap and like take care of me and all that. That's two completely different things. That's all I wanted to say.
Choosing to be vulnerable as a sort of mode of being.
Yeah, that suggests a sort of something self-directed to me, Jan, as opposed to a sort of save me. And one speaks of therapy and one speaks of an active involvement in a group process or a personal process. The sort of throwing myself into someone's lap, when I imagine that's those two feel like very, very different experiences. I hear them as very different experiences.
Yeah, and also the hangover, like afterwards, if it's not chosen, it can be stir up a whole lot of shit, I guess.
I remember when I trained as a person-centered counselor in 2010, one of the teachers referred to, I think it was a book by Dave Mans about person-centered training, where the dividing boundary between a client and a therapist is very little, and I completely related to that. And when I was doing the training, it was very, very palpable, to the extent that I was questioning whether I was resilient enough to step into that role. But I mean, it seems to be common knowledge that the therapy profession attracts people who have suffered, and then that gives them an insight on understanding somebody else who might be suffering. And part of me feels, horrible to generalize again and to really wanting to make this point, but I do wonder whether the person-centered approach attracts even more clients, as in I see, somebody that struggled with mood problems and confidence problems for most of my adult life, until, yes, something shifted, and unfortunately I'm still in the shifted era. Yes, so I'm just aware that the main motivator possibly of me wanting to have this talk is the clashes between people in groups and people who have a certain focus. They want to get somewhere, or at least it seems like they want to get somewhere. And there's another person that's not necessarily want to get somewhere, but it's more focused about, I don't know whether it's the ritual, how we treat each other.
Yeah, I like to comment on that, the notion of a ritual, because I think I feel like there's so many so many things that goes wrong that's also conditioned by our culture in not treating other people as a human being, and just seeing them as objects, so I can kind of get something from you or something like that, and not perceiving the humanity in others and in all of us. I think we really, if to broaden the, like I was saying, cultural, I think we need that. I think we really need that ritual to not only to develop ourselves, but in order to develop the culture that's kind of optimizing everything, and always in doing mode, and not being, less and less being, and the value of yeah, I like the frame ritual. I think that's a very valuable idea to frame it in that way, and it kind of broadened it up for me, seeing it more as a broader cultural necessity of developing. And yeah, thank you for bringing that concept in.
Yeah, ritual for me has a lot of positive connotations. about eras in which human beings were more ritual beings. My understanding is these days rituals became more formal than having substance. But I think, and also, you know, being married to a Japanese woman, and I feel is so integral to Japanese culture. How we treat each other at the beginning of each time we encounter each other. You don't go straight into informal.
Yeah, I really want to comment on that too, because I think this points to also the reverence in itself, like, and the sacredness of encountering another being. And I think we need more reverence, and I think that's closely connected to rituals, and not in a formal way, but in a deep, and this is something I'm really passionate about. This where we're at now. I think it's also touching on my kind of passion for philosophy and contemporary things. I just appreciate where we're going now. I feel excited about the development.
A question came from Susie. I would like to put it to the group, and so maybe this could be the last moment before we break, because we are due to break to then resume at 9:45, when we're gonna have another member joining us for that second part of today's talk. So Susie is saying that trust evolves in the group through relationship to others. This trust leaves little that can be trusted. My hope in group process is that I can come to be more trusting of myself and others. That's abstract, but I hope it makes sense. It makes sense to me. Thank you, Susie.
Yeah.
So we're gonna comment on Susie. I'm still thinking about how to comment.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, Susie. For my own part, if my level of trust is dictates how much I involve myself in the group process. Without it, you know, I'm kind of there in image, but not actually participating. So yeah, that seems to be the foundation for me of entering into the group process, or my own process within the group process.
What I'm reading, Susie, is that there is a hope in you coming into the group, that you can come to be more trusting of yourself and others. So you come with that hope. And you acknowledge that this trust leaves little that can be trusted. And so I wonder whether Susie means that once one is in a position of feeling distrust, that is a vicious cycle, and is not something that is not a position that Susie wants to be in. Her hope is, in fact, the opposite. to come into the group to be more trusting of herself and others.
Yeah, I think I also want to say something. What came up for me right now was again back to the notion of flow, or the sense of flow. If I continually like distrust the environment or the field or myself, I think it's impossible to get into a state of flow. And yeah, so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yes, yes, and yet I have been in positions in my life where without the ritual, and for ritual, Jan, I guess what I'm saying is unconditional positive regard and empathy to unfold, to materialize in the group. I was not able to avoid mistrust, and it did get in the way, exactly in the way you said it. And I would often feel frustrated because a part of me would feel, well, I showed up to being in the flow and I am not.
It was something I wanted to share, but I think I lost it. It was no.
Right. We need to break, but if Susie wants to comment, we'll pick up any comments. She may have to our comments on her sharing. We will pick it up in the second part, even though we will be talking about gender differences. Then we can always start from answering any answers before we get into that. Yes, Susie, if that's okay, we'll get back to that question in a few minutes, so that everyone gets to have the short break before the other person joins us. So see you at quarter. I tell you what, that's too short. Can we come back at 10 to? So 12 minutes from now, 10 to whatever time it's in your country.
Thank you.
You don't need to disconnect unless you want to. You can simply mute your camera and microphone.
Okay.
So we've agreed to continue for another quarter of an hour or so on the comparison between group aspirations. And Jan, if you...
Yeah, I just wanted to, I noticed like first I was agreeing with your statement, Cindy, about we have to trust that others take care of their needs or wants. That's how I heard it. And also, I just wanted to add the fact that in a relational context, it's also important to, of course, we can also invite curiosity about others' experience. I just wanted to add that, I guess, for my, yeah, I think that's a valuable aspect to get those insights, like, oh, you're curious about that, and like, I'm curious too. why did I say that, or why it triggered me, and so on, so on. So it invites a sense of exploration, and of course, noticing boundaries also in that exploration.
Thank you. That really makes sense, and I guess what I was talking about was a starting point.
Oh.
And then, yeah, of course, to bring in the relational and that to get into flow or not, but that starting point of,
Okay.
yeah.
I get you.
Can I make one comment on that as well? Because it seems to me that with the person-centered group, when you're talking about UPR, which is important, which is like obviously one of the three core conditions, but there's also sort of congruence, and I sometimes think that that's a dilemma when you have a reaction, then have to kind of process that, and how do you bring that if it's going to challenge someone else, and or it's going to challenge what's happening in the group, and I think that for me anyway, that's the difficult part. How do I remain congruent when I don't like what's going on, and I don't know how to bring that? And I think curiosity is what you said, Jan, was really useful. But I think that it can shut people down. So in terms of not having any rules, I found that sometimes person-centered groups, that is kind of like a rule, you know, and I'm wondering.
What feels like a rule?
UPR, you know, that it takes priority over everything else, the congruence and the, gosh, I've even forgotten the third one now.
Empathy.
Because I think the tendency can be to over-empathise and also to be uncritical, positive regard being constituted sort of superficially as being nice to other people. So I think, you know, I think congruence has a big role to play in this. And I think that's where I find it challenging, the difference between the different groups. And I sometimes find that there's a kind of tyranny of niceness and empathy can lead to one person taking the whole space because everyone's trying to empathize because what they're bringing is maybe important. But anyway, I just kind of I've got mixed feelings about this. I think I didn't automatically agree with you, Francesco, that those differences were clearly delineated.
Yes, and I'm disagreeing with me because I suppose, yes, I did often feel that way, that there was a tyranny of kindness in some allegedly person-centered encounter groups. Note the word allegedly, because like you're saying, you know, it's three conditions there, and kindness is none of them. Empathy is one of them. Congruence is one of them. But I suppose I would like to ask each one of us, person-centered people with a background in person-centered therapy, do we have an ambition? Because to me, one of the things that attracted me to, you know, here and now circling ART groups is that the aspirations are made clear and transparent. Whereas in person-centered encounter groups, in theory, there are no rules. But like Terry says, sometimes when you are in environments with no rules, some unwritten rules, I feel the presence of them, but I can't be sure. I may be wrong in labeling whatever I think is a rule.
Yeah, what comes up for me there, Francesco, is in person-centered groups, I bump into all sorts of rules that I perceive to be there, or I feel to be there. Even if they're not vocalized, I bump into them from how people respond to me or how I see others responding. So the group, in my experience, there seems to be this sort of a group creation of the environment, and that can be different each time, but there's some, you know, if you drop the word person-centered in front of it, as you said, Terry, there's some assumptions around empathy and UPR, and Susie, you just said about empathic understanding and the confusion between empathy and UPR sometimes. So it feels like a sort of a living process, and sometimes I recognize that those rules that I think I perceive are as much mine, how I feel I need to be in the group, and I'm bumping into my own sort of self-concept in that moment. And that's the liberating aspect for me, when I recognize that through in relationship with others, when I recognize that I'm being somehow defended in my way of relating, that there's my learning. And it's not that I enter group with that in mind to do, it just sort of happens. It's a sort of happy outcome. Whereas in here and now groups, I'm much more focused on that being part of my process. I know that's what I'm there for. I'm consciously making myself vulnerable. So I guess that's the difference in the two processes for me. Just a part of the difference.
Are you saying that you become aware of others' rules, which you're not, you can't be certain what they are, but you feel them, but also aware of your own rules in those moments?
Yes. Yeah.
I just wonder about this interaction between what you perceive as others' rules and what you perceive as your rules.
Well, sometimes people are quite vocal about what they think are the group rules, and in other instances, I might have some experience with a certain person and feel there's a certain expectation from them. So, you know, it's kind of like a lively mix, and it's constantly changing for me, how I perceive what I imagine the rules might be within any group. It's always changing.
Right. So, for instance, in the instance where the other person makes it very obvious what their preferences are to happen in the group, is that a good example of that helping you becoming aware of what your rules are in contrast with theirs?
No, generally in those instances, I feel a bit of pushback, and I acknowledge that they're their rules, and normally that wakes something up in me that feels like I need to challenge that, because it doesn't come from within, or it doesn't feel relational. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's a sort of we come to some sort of common there's something that invites the entering into flow with each other when we acknowledge each other's needs. I don't know, it gets complicated for me. I think I'm straying a little bit.
It is complicated, Cindy.
I would love to comment on what's being said about UPR, and also I also resonate with the empathic understanding, and I think that's a valuable thing to I guess I see it as similar. I also wanted to bring into this UPR, and yeah, I'm not very familiar with these distinctions, but for me, it's about the quality of listening. All the three principles in I forgot, like the Carl Rogers principles. For me, I see it as a quality of listening, I guess, and I think that kind of sums it up, at least for me. And I also wanted to bring in the quality of listening, yeah, or listening in like a thing that's crucial. And listening, not like in a broad sense, like I can listen to me, like listening to you and yeah, everything. Yeah, trying to make sense, but I'm not sure if I'm able to.
It's a focused listening, Jan, you mean? It's not just sort of like a, I can hear it. It's a kind of like a listening intensely to understand and to, yeah.
Yeah, I think like it's I can listen to you and hear the words, and I might not make any sense of it before I kind of listening to other people's humanity. I think it's like pointing to the level of listening, so I can resonate with part, or a part of me is resonating with you, so I can connect to what you're saying, and that will bring me closer to emphasize and understand you. So listening outward and also listening to, I think this is obvious when I'm saying it, but I just wanted to bring in the listening as a thing, as a crucial thing.
I'd like to go back to what Cindy said. Thanks, Jan. What said a few minutes ago, a couple of minutes ago, when you said it's complicated, and you were mentioning the interaction between others' rules, your own rules, and what happens when a person makes it so obvious about what their preferences are, and talked about resistance. This doesn't apply to Cindy, or doesn't apply to those interactions, but what came up for me, being in a position of, similar to what the one Cindy was saying, say I perceive somebody's rules and I resist them. Say I feel particularly vulnerable, and I think that this person's rules make me feel more vulnerable and might hurt me. I feel that I can get, or I did get caught up in this vicious cycle of blame. Where I can interpret my struggles in the group and my vulnerabilities in the group as being caused by somebody. But that very person is actually saying that my inability to be in the here and now, or whatever their preferences are getting in their way. And it seems like a vicious cycle of blame, where we sort of objectify, both parties seem to objectify, rather than being in the flow. It is like this, oh, your rules make impacts me, my ability to do self-development. Even worse than that, you could traumatize me with your being directive. And the other person feels equally aggrieved, in inverted commas. I'm just inviting you to drop your storytelling. I'm just inviting you to drop your guard. And then we're gonna get there together. Trust me. It's almost like there's an implicit trust me. But in those moments, the last thing I can experience is trust for you, my dear person.
It's that top-down thing, isn't it, that I'm hearing? Someone telling you to trust and be a certain way, rather than it being something that is rising up within you in response to the person, the environment, your sense of stability and trust within the group. Does that?
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
What came up for me then, Francesco, was, I guess, is sometimes I guess there's levels, isn't there? There's the agreement about how we will be in the group that is has been verbalized and agreed, you know, this open agreement that's out there and it's in the clear. This is how what we're going to strive to be within this group context.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's everything that falls below that belongs to us and that perhaps isn't verbalized, or that's coming into play through interaction. You know, somebody's rules and somebody's resistance to rules, and so there's levels of group agreement for me. And yeah, so there's what's open and observable, and then everything below that for me is grist for the mill. That's where my learning is.
Thank you, Cindy. But before you talked about rules, but what about goals? And I'm asking this question to myself as well. I suppose because I've been organizing groups lately rather than joining groups organized by others. The whole idea of what are my goals in this group, I sort of parked it, particularly in encounter groups. In here and now groups is much easier because everybody shares the same goal of being in the here and now. So I lost touch, but like you guys were saying, it's palpable. Whatever one strives for, whether they are aware or not, the other person would feel like, oh, that's the rules. That's Francesco's rules. That's his goal. You can feel it. Right. Jan.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about like the finger pointing and the vicious blame thing that we can get caught up in, and I think that's also can be a good entrance to be curious about. If that's possible, maybe not with the two person who is kind of up against each other, but if there's a third person who can kind of point that out and be curious about the reaction or the trigger. Also, I think it's inevitable to be realistic that will happen. And also, I think it's something that points to resilience and also being able to repair the relationship. I think that's super valuable because we, in a broader sense, in not like this basis, I think that's very valuable to repair. And also, there's usually a lot of energy in approaching conflict. Just wanted to, I think I just wanted to have some nuances about like the blame versus the, and also of course naming boundaries in that.
Right. Oh, this is so good, Jan. There was this group where I thought I named what was going on between this cycle of blame. I wasn't, in my example earlier, I was being the person that felt defensive about somebody else's rules. In this case, I was the third person. You said a third person could be helpful. I have this example in which I was a third person and I was unhelpful and I would do things differently. I suppose I was armed with the best intentions and naming, making the implicit explicit is something that Carl Rogers would do, and I thought I was doing that, but then I joined the cycle of blame myself, because what I said on that occasion was, I'm hearing these two parties, and I would like to invite for more compassion. So I was blaming. I was basically implying neither of you is being compassionate with one another. I got completely caught up in that. Yes, I was naming what I was seeing, but with judgment.
Yeah, it's like going in when you take that third person. It's like going in without intentions. It's like going in with curiosity, without intention, and then the possibility of blame or entering into that conflict is less, because you're not going in with an intention of resolving it. You're going in with an intention of like being curious about what is actually happening, what's going on for these two people that are locked in some kind of battle, and yeah. So what's caused that? What is that process for both of them, and the process together that they're in? And I think that's something about curiosity, because earlier on we mentioned it. We were talking about sort of I think it was unconditional positive regard, UPR, sort of that curiosity, but it's empathic in terms of trying to understand, but it's not sort of being drawn into that, taking sides or feeling judgmental about it. It's more about like, what's going on, what is going on here, what's happening for you.
Yeah, I also wanted to point out the fact that in that context is also very helpful to go into like your sensations. Just try to be curious about directly the sensations. Is that kind of, oh, I have to check in, and that of course drops me into from this reactivity and down to another level. Also wanted to say something else in this context, because it's something to be said about, at least for me personally, training, like I'm trying to be more affirmative. Like I want to develop, I guess, related to confidence and being clear and like affirm. Is that the right word? Affirm? Like affirmative? Yeah, and I think that's also something that points to resilience and like being solid in how I show up.
I'm not sure I understand the context in which you were using the word affirmative. Was that for yourself, affirmative of yourself?
Yeah, in like approaching a conflict and being clear, and not like fawning, like as a response, fawning or freezing or fighting, like something totally different, to be solid and concrete and say that like, okay, this is what's real for me.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So sort of self-affirming in that moment, holding your center.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
I also think like it's very easy to make conflict as a phenomenon wrong.
Mm.
Mm.
To perceive it as negative, as opposed to a potential for growth.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. Well, that's the title of the conference.
Potential for growth. It's a real potential for growth.
Mm.
For people on inside the conflict and outside the conflict.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to like an anecdote of how circling was kind of discovered. Was actually to people who observed a conflict and kind of like, so being curious. That's how the practice of circling emerged, actually.
Right. If I may, I would like to take this opportunity to remind ourselves of the title, of the name of this talk. Which
I wondered when you were going to do that, Francesca.
Just because Jan has just mentioned it right now, you've just mentioned the name of the conference, Challenging Situations and When and How They Can Support Self-Development. So the next segment is going to be gender issues in group work. And the reason why I thought they belonged to the topic of challenging situations and how they can support self-development, maybe a big assumption of mine. Maybe I will discover in the next hour that when a man encounters a woman in a group, that is not necessarily challenging, and that might not lead to self-development. But I suspect that it is somewhat challenging to talk about these issues. And I wonder whether, yes, there will be some self-growth as a result of this conversation. So before we talked about how two different cultures coming together may clash on what is there to be focused on, or how to be treating each other, respect each other within the duration of the group. And I suppose I was wondering that we could see a man-woman relationship in a group also from that angle, as two different worlds, biologically and so forth, coming together, negotiating what is an okay way to interact and connect.
I noticed like I want to throw in something, a nuance right at this start, I guess. I think I think I perceive it as a yin and yang relationship. Like we have both of them within us, a very directive kind of masculine yang energy, and a more nurturing yin that's often related to women. But I feel that's, yeah, I can speak for myself that I usually more comfortable with yin, too comfortable. So I just want to nuance that kind of very categorical.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, Jan, because because of the way we look doesn't necessarily represent our femininity, masculinity, femininity. It's very nuanced, and everybody is different. And I think that's really important to notice that. So we don't exist as opposites. I don't think so. Even with yin and yang, I don't think we exist as opposites. It's always a mix and many. It's not just yin and yang. There might be other identities that wouldn't come into that, that might not perceive yin and yang. They might not have that sort of, they might position themselves outside of that as well.
Shall we throw in Susie's comment? When we talk about gender, I feel a need to say something about socialization. What I mean is the gender is socialized. I have been socialized as a woman. That's Susie's contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting that. And so again, for me, there's layers, what you said, Jan, about these sort of intrinsic qualities that we all have and hold and display to one degree or another. And then there's our, as Susie said, our socialization. And then, of course, I bring my own script from my family and life experience. So these kind of, this interplay, it feels like it's so multifaceted, isn't it? It feels like a sort of sphere of existence rather than a kind of something black and white that I can depict in one way or another. I talk about all of those aspects of myself when I think about gender. So again, I'm going to use the word complex.
And also another thing, listening to you, Cindy, it's very context dependent. Like it's highly context dependent.
Yeah, depending on the context, I might bring some of my feminine essence to the fore, and depending in other contexts, I may want to sort of draw from my masculinity qualities, maybe because I'm surrounded by alpha male and I need some of that to survive or to be appreciated.
Yeah.
But I want to share that I fear of upsetting people with generalization, and I have a traumatizing experience, somewhat traumatizing, from my person-centered training, in which I approached the gender in a very clumsy way, and there was never coming back. I spent 2 years with that group of 20, half men, half women, and at that time I had big passion about talking about gender issues, and I generalized about rationality and nourishment, and a few women sort of didn't like that. The group did the same with racial issues between white and black. We tried, it just stayed in the surface, and we didn't go there. We spent 2 years and we didn't talk about racial differences, and we didn't talk about gender differences. And it's like, yes, then in the end we become so politically correct because we don't want to upset one another. And yet, how can I not upset you unless I make a little degree of generalization?
It's like nobody talks about the big elephant in the room. Everybody is noticing it, but because of the fear, as you're saying, Francesco, Like the
Yeah.
political correctness goes like this with niceness and like being appropriate, and that's super confining usually. Like, oh, I have to stare like this, and I have to like manage how I'm showing up, and it creates like a top-down kind of weird thing potentially.
It's like there's very little tolerance for error. You know, you're supposed to get everything right. You're never supposed to say anything that's wrong. And that wrongness is where learning could be, you know, because we're told, you know, we have these inconsistencies in ourselves. We have been through our own socialization, and we might not be aware of things. We, you know, like what you're saying, Francesco, you're coming from a kind of a curiousness, which is maybe, like you said, clumsy, because we're, you know, wanting to learn. And when you're sort of, that's wrong, you're wrong, you must be completely wrong because you said this. It's fear, so nobody wants to stick their head over. And actually, how are we going to learn if we don't approach each other with acceptance and say, I don't know, I'm not, I might make mistakes, but no mistake is intended, no hurt is intended. And I trust you to, you know, you might say something that gets me, but like I can see that it's your process, and you might, you know, at this exchange can help. I don't know whether I've made myself clear.
Very clear. Thank you.
I was reading something about this recently, Terry, and it related to racism, and I can't remember who the author was, but they were saying actually the onus is on the person who's not in the minority to educate themselves, not the person who's in the minority to educate them. But there's part of me that feels exactly as you just said. There needs to be a willingness for a dialogue and for mistakes to be made. If I'm in the process of acknowledging my racism or you know, sexism, I need to be able to have that conversation where I will make mistakes, because stuff's come, you know, there's probably material I'm not aware of there, and that will come to the fore. Unless that trust is there for me to bring that and to have it accepted, it's not going to happen, and I'll remain buttoned down or unable to explore those differences. So yeah, thank you. That was really helpful.
Explore those differences. So maybe this kind of ties in with the first of Susie's new messages. So she goes, from the perspective of those socialized as female, a woman-centered perspective, according to Chaplin 2003, states that everything is divided in our minds into opposites: masculine and feminine, public and private, objective and subjective, outcome and process. One side is deemed superior and must win and or rule over the other. Opposites typically associated with women, for example, subjective, private, vulnerable, are devalued, thus maintaining women's oppression. And then Susie wonders whether men's oppressing one's own vulnerability is also oppressive.
I think that's a very good point, actually. You know, if you suppress your vulnerabilities, then you're locking everything in, and I think that's a denial of part of yourself, isn't it? And I think that's part of the process of denying the vulnerability of others. And you know, that's what we do. When we deny it in ourselves, we deny it in others. We undervalue it in others. So it's a kind of, to me, it's a kind of, nothing gets better unless we begin to acknowledge and accept our own vulnerabilities and share those vulnerabilities and accept those in other people as well.
Nothing gets better.
again, it's like that. You've got to be open to yourself in order to be open to others. So if you don't, I don't know. I'll stop there because I'm going to confuse myself.
Thank you. I want to throw the biological into the mix as well, not because I'm expecting that we go there, but it's just one of the ingredients. So when the more I get reactive, so whether I'm fearful, anxious, angry, the more I get reactive, the more likely that I show up biologically as a male. That's my experience. So I may raise my voice and come across aggressive, and maybe there's passion mixed with aggression. So I suppose that's where the most potential trouble, I suppose, is I suppose that in my mind, I am more likely to be misunderstood by a woman, or a woman is more likely to be wary of me than a man would be around that reaction of masculinity. Because I'm causing feelings to other people, right? I'm causing that anger would be causing feelings.
And also in that perspective, in the biological perspective, I know that for a fact women have about 70% more fear responses biologically, because of the fact that they can carry children, so their fear response is biologically interwoven with that nurturing part.
Otherwise, they'd be careless mothers if they weren't so susceptible to pick up on potential danger. Potential danger.
Exactly. In the subconscious level, of course, or more or less. So I feel like I'm treading on thin.
You are, Jan. Because I kind of like, I can notice there's a bit of a reaction in me because I'm not aware that I have like more fears than anyone else. No, don't apologize at all, Jan. It's just, I just noticed that, somebody's telling me what I am. It's like, no. But it's okay. It's fine, because this is the sort of thing this is the sort of thing that is useful, because I'm not aware of that. What I am aware of it, that for me, the main difference between men and women is that, as far as I know, is we go through, at least while we're fertile, we go through a great many changes hormonally than men. Men have a kind of, or at least that's my understanding, and I might be wrong, is that we have a lot of, basically because we are female and we have a reproductive system and it's cyclical, we go through cycles every month. And I don't know whether men do that. So we have a that's the only thing that I can think of for me, apart from the fact that we do have children, but that maybe has an impact on ourselves, those hormonal influences on ourselves that we don't necessarily have, I won't say control over, we can't control, but we might be able to control our response to these if we live in sync with them. But I think to a large part we don't live in sync with them. We're trying to nullify the effects. I mean, I know when I was a teenager, I hated the influence of this on me. I wasn't, it was like what's going on.
Thank you for your sharing, Terry. incredibly instructive. I admit my ignorance, or partial ignorance. But where I'm not ignorant, I suppose, is being on a journey with couples, as that's what I do, being a couple therapist. And I do note that the large majority of couples that have been seeking my support have been seeking the support after the birth of the first child.
Mm.
And I don't know whether this is more reflective of the modern couple than the modern straight couple, or whether it is representative of the straight couples in general, regardless of this moment in history. But the way about a woman feel about her partner varies after the birth of a first child. And of course, I am biased because I tend to see the couples that struggle. I don't tend to see the couples that thrive. But so I know that that period of life is challenging. I know that impacts on feelings. So I suppose what I was saying about my biological responses, particularly at these stages of people's lives, become very important, because if I am to be reactive very often, and my woman is already going through a major period of changing of her identity, because perhaps she was working and now all her life is dedicated to this baby. So she's made sacrifices for the family. So identity sacrifices and major emotional and physical sacrifices to freedom, because you can't just decide overnight, you can't decide to go out for a walk. Everything is dependent on the cycle of that baby. So major shifts. So I suppose if I don't watch my masculinity, I would very easily be coming across as uncaring. I guess I went on a tangent there.
I also think that like in that you were sharing, Francesco, at least how or it's a very big generalization, but I think it's also connected to age when you are being a parent. Like I didn't know, I wasn't mature when I was being a dad. Like I think some, like, we're talking about self-development, and I think that's something closely connected to parenthood and to be responsible as a male, and also being tolerant or tolerant, not a good word, but the kind of seeing the need of that mother who's going through all that changes of identity and everything you mentioned. I guess I'm pointing towards balance and responsibility.
This is a really big thing. I mean, I think this is one, I don't know. I'm not, you know, when I talk as a woman, I talk for myself. I can't talk for all women. It's ridiculous. We're all different and our experiences will be different. But in terms of responsibility, my personal experiences, I've had to take on all the responsibility for the child. I am supported by my partner vicariously, money, shelter. I'm not working anymore, but nothing else is really considered. I mean, you know, my experience of pregnancy was wonderful. You know, I'm just sharing my own experience. So, you know, what I went through was I had an amazing pregnancy, fine. I had a cesarean section, so I had major surgery, which was a real shock. It was quite traumatic, and being in the hospital afterwards was quite traumatic. And I came home and I just felt invaded by people. My mother-in-law, you know, everybody was in me, telling me what to do and how to do things. And it kind of separated me a little bit from the child, from my baby. And I needed space and time to build a relationship, because you don't know. And you know, you were talking earlier on, Francis, about, you know, maybe the younger generation. And I've experienced sort of people having that real shock, young women having a real shock of what it's like to have a baby, and the fear of, you know, dropping it. And we carry that. It seems like we are on our own in that. That's my experience. And I still feel that, not for all the women I know, young women I know that have had children, but certainly the majority of them, where they feel very much alone in their motherhood.
That's exactly consistent with my experience of the couples I work with. And by the time they see me, that often the woman has fallen out of love. There is resentment, and yeah, there is so much baggage that I don't, you know, as a therapist, you know, what immense task you've got before your eyes.
And I think it's a lot to do with the difference between us, you know. It's a lot to do with losing sight of each other in the process. This child has come along, and mum is like breastfeeding, feeding, you know, sustaining life. Mm-hmm. And dad is kind of, what do I do? What's my role here? And you know, and also with my experience of males, is they don't like being told what or how to do things. So there's that's where the breakdown comes, because I think that you can't tell someone how to do something. I don't know. I mean, that's one of my things.
Yes, so you like the initiative as opposed to asking for it. That's where the caring comes. If I've asked you, then you're not being caring.
Mm. Yes.
And like you said, if I ask you, it doesn't go down well anyway.
No, because once you start saying, oh, you know, how to put a nappy on, this is how you do it, and the baby's screaming, and I mean, this is my experience, because I did most of the nappy changing, if not all of the nappy change. It was like my experience, I can do it quickly, but also allowing the man to do that, allowing my partner to do that, you know, against the stress for the baby, and also don't tell me what to do. So you're stuck in that kind of trying to help them take part. And then when you do, kind of, I don't know, that was my experience anyway.
I don't know if this is a big shot, but I don't see this as being too dissimilar between, potentially not too dissimilar in the interaction between a man and a woman, with all the differences across the spectrum. In a group, there's something about the perception of the utter lack of care and interest that is like perception that perception is what comes up for me, because like I say, when the couple sees me and the woman has fallen out of love already, and there's so much resentment already, the man hasn't seen that happening. despite he knows that she has been giving that feedback for quite some time. So the man has not a clue about how he's being perceived, probably specifically with regards to the perception of uncaring, for how long he's been perceived, his actions have been perceived as uncaring. Because otherwise he would have done something about it before, because most of these men are annihilated emotionally by the realization that their marriage is over at a time where they thought their family would start. They didn't see that coming. And
I noticed, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just noticed like I'm partly like, I think I'm agreeing with most of what's being said, but I'm struggling to find the link, or I guess I'm like, maybe we're doing it now, addressing the gender differences, but I want to kind of link this into what's like in the group experience, like go back to the self-development perspective, because we can talk and talk for like hours about these issues, or but I think also want to say like I think this is yeah, I think I'm a bit lost about how we can bring this back into group.
Yeah,
Right,
I'm sorry.
I mean-
I feel like I lost. I think I was going into my own experience, and I'm sorry I kind of
Me too.
sidetracked a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
Because you know, I don't, you know, that was my experience, or part of my experience. But I'm not the only mother here.
Yes, but sorry, Terry. For me, the link is like, I wonder whether I am perceived as uncaring in a group, where, in a way that I don't have much of a clue, because my being a male gives me a perception that is different than the perception of a female, about my behavior, about my anger.
So are you trying to explore your own perception of yourself, or is it a general perception of being a man?
I know that sometimes my anger, let's put it this way, sometimes my anger in groups has intimidated men and women. But with regards to the intimidation of women in particular, in the light of working with so many couples and realizing that men don't realize that something is disintegrating before their eyes, their marriage, I assume that that's the case for me. Very often I don't realize how negative an impact my anger had on others.
I think that points to like the whole concept of anger. I think anger can be super helpful at times, and also it can come. And I'm trying to speak for myself, but I think anger as a thing can be super helpful and appropriate response. And also, I also imagine, that's me, like it can afford a sense of being protected, like showing strength. Maybe not initially it can be like, whoa, what the fuck? But it can also show strength and being protective of values.
think so, but
Yeah.
it could show up like that.
Susie put something in the chat about the group process being able to help us identify and move beyond these binary positions. And I really like the way you worded that, Susie. And that for me has been something very powerful within the group process about helping me to identify where I am gendered, you know, where my gender stereotypes lie within myself and also in response to the other. So that's where the value comes in the group process for me. Whatever that position might be, Francesca, whether I'm associating anger as a sort of a male quality, I have anger, I exhibit anger in myself, and do I feel that's not feminine, perhaps? So, you know, in that instance, it helps me to identify where I've picked up a, you know, a script or something about how I should be within this world as a woman. So that's where the group process becomes really valuable for me, and also bleeds into sort of my attachment style and my mother and my father and their influence. So yeah, that's where I find and I have found when I tread on a personal gender issue, it's a big one for me. I feel that the gender issues for me personally, the group has helped me to identify just what a huge influence that has over how I relate to the other, male or female. It's been one of the biggest identifiers for me of how I present and how I relate. So gender's an awakener for me, gender issues, amongst others.
I realized I was quite abstract and I didn't give an example. I wonder whether this example would makes it more helpful. I've been in groups, particularly I can think of a couple of times where a man challenged a woman and displayed anger and was insistent in the challenge throughout the group duration. And I witnessed the utmost outrage at the man. And yes, and I remember those experiences as particularly telling of the fact the gender seemed to play a part. It's an assumption of mine, but I wonder whether if the challenge of this, the completely repeated challenge animated by anger throughout the group was directed to a man, whether the outrage would have been less, because the offense would have been perceived as a less serious offense.
Yeah.
I guess if we were generalizing that men will perceive anger as less or more acceptable, but that is a generalization. I personally can't know. It's different for each person. So I guess what I'm trying to do is to identify and identify in myself where I may hold assumptions about how because based on gender, about how it may land with someone. Yeah.
Yeah, also is resonating with I guess the complexity of this topic into generalizing it. You were mentioning attachment style, Cindy, and I think that's what we can kind of get curious about when this dynamic happens. Often is, of course, also related to how, like, sometimes it can be related to power dynamics, and also the cultural conditioning, and I think the only way the only way to kind of resolve it is to go into drop down some levels, at least one level, to make sense of the attachments styles, because it's a super complex thing in my view.
It's not just gender that makes us different, you know. There's lots of different reasons, and attachment is one thing. Experience, context, who you're talking to, it all has a play. You know, there's a gender, you know, gender is one thing, and I suppose the way round that is to look at people as people, you know, like a person, not a gender. And Cindy, when you were talking, it's one of the things that you know, I don't see when I'm talking. I'm not thinking of myself as a woman most of the time. I'm thinking of myself as a person. And when when something about gender comes into it, and I'm like, oh, why did that come up? Where did that come from? That's what, you know, when I'm being gendered, or when I see someone else being gendered, someone else being responded to as a woman as opposed to as a person, that's when I kind of like, and only in this discussion and am I kind of noticing it, I suppose. It's like in retrospect.
Yes, I mean, my example was a real selection of a selection of a selection, where I thought the gender was telling of the situation, but most of the time I don't use those lenses to make sense of the situation, and I don't hold assumption that what's happening before my eyes is a reflection of gender interactions. But on that particular one, what I could say is that I let myself, I take responsibility for letting myself being affected, because after those couple of instances, I realized that if I behaved in a way similar to that man in that group, I would probably jeopardize my relationship with a lot of people. And I suppose that yes, it did. I held back in my interactions with women in a way that I haven't held back in my interactions with men after those two events in groups.
So it's kind of it's a bit like being shut down in a way. You feel like you can't be your true authentic self. You have to sort of kind of adjust the way you are, because now you feel like, well, I need to be careful because I'm talking to a woman here, or that I might something might blow up in my face. Something might happen if I don't take care.
I think that's a fair understanding of what I said, and I appreciate that I have my own traumas about personal life, and having let down women in my life, and I have my baggage, I have my hesitations. So my perception of those two events, is liable to have been affected by my own baggage.
Also, like I want to throw into that, it's easy to be shameful after expressing anger. and that can create a pattern of avoidance of repairing that, like we can go into this like not meeting because it's more comfortable to not address whatever happened. And shame is a powerful thing.
Shall we read some of Susie's contributions?
I'd be grateful because I'm reading them and I'm unable to respond because then I leave the sort of what I'm hearing from the group. But I am appreciating everything you're writing, Susie, and I'd like some time to respond.
Susie says, my experience is to introject anger and direct it inwardly. Being in group where trust exists supports me to experience anger and all sorts of feelings that when trust exists, as I am experiencing it here, allows me to explore it in less self-critical ways and be human.
And I think that's where the growth is. That sort of, you know, if I don't know, I feel like if I can accept my bad, my shadow, or even not even bad, just my anger or whatever it is I'm feeling, if I can sit with it and it's accepted by the group, I'm not shut down, then I can, it's got movement, it's got room to grow, it's got room to be explored, it's got room to express itself. It's not being shut down. I'm not having to keep it in.
What came up for me then, Terry, is, and there's something coming together for me about this whole gender thing, is when we attach a value judgment against an emotion, whether it's anger or, you know, kindness, you know, feeling kind. So whatever the emotion is behind that, then it becomes, there's the potential for it to become a gender issue or as bad, or I shouldn't be this. My feeling is that my personal wish is to be able to acknowledge my femininity or the masculine in me as a woman, and to have that accepted without being defined by it or expected to behave in a certain way. So so my anger is just my anger, and it tells me something about myself. Not that I'm being a bad woman, or I'm behaving in a masculine way. So yeah, that's what that came up for me then.
I really appreciate that, Cindy. I heard it as a kind of the purity of the response is don't need anything else than acceptance of that, without like putting all kinds of labels to it.
Yes. So Cindy, you're talking about where the temptation to put a label to it when we attach a belief to a feeling. And I'm also thinking those two examples that affected me in groups. I think the biological difference don't help, because it could be perceived as a male, you know, as an outraging act done by a person to a person, but then it could have been perceived as a man done to a woman, as opposed to a person, ideally a person to a person, but it could be perceived as an offense done from a man to a woman because of the biological differences, because the way it was, the explosion was a very masculine explosion. So it's hard to see as something that you could have done yourself, because you never have done it with, you know, with such a high degree of masculinity, which makes the anger more brutal, I guess.
I see two responsibilities here. From my part, I acknowledge that there's a back history of men being physically dominant and aggressive to women, and I know it's often the other way around, but you know that there is that sort of back history, and I acknowledge that, and that I carry that into my interactions, my knowledge of that. Sorry, I'm sort of, I felt something then, and I'm trying to articulate it. And then the second part is for me to then not impose that on future transactions, to be in them as they are. It's impossible for me to ignore my history and what I know, and you know, the greater women's history. However, I feel it my responsibility, if I'm to move forward as a person who is a woman, in all my relationships, that I allow that relationship to arise fresh. I don't know if I'm being clear.
Yes, yes.
I think sorry.
You go, Jay. Yeah.
No, I think it sounds like your point, like where or you was talking about a certain degree of discernment that you kind of bring into interactions, that you can discern, like, oh, this is a man, but maybe he's not like violent or whatever. I'm not like I just noticed a sense of in me right now. I feel like some frustration around this. I think it's almost impossible to generalize this. At least for me, I think that's what my frustration is telling me. It's like, if you take the cultural perspective and all the perceptions, it won't like give anything. In how I view it, like, it's a deep layer of, like you were saying, like attachment style and parents and family systems and everything. So I think that's my frustration right now. Is to, I don't feel any, to be honest, I don't think it's a lack of value, like the value is kind of declining.
The value.
Yeah, the kind of, like, I feel like we're kind of hammering out, like repeating ourselves or something. Sorry, that's why
I totally respect the repeating, and on the other hand, I can't help thinking of my experience in that group, right? With that, I shared a very deep journey with those individuals, and we scratched the surface of gender. So that was the opposite of repetition. It was a non-starter. But I also feel like, yeah, I am anxious. I don't feel bored. I don't see the repetition, but I am anxious about how my faulty generalization.
I think I would like to hear more, if you are able to share more about the context, Francesco. Maybe that will be more valuable, if it's possible, due to confidentiality and stuff.
Yes, yes. Yes, I can see why one may not feel so engaged without the context. I lost my chain of thoughts. I want to get back to you, Jan, with that.
Can I just ask, Jan, because I was interested in repetition, and I was wondering whether you're talking about within this group, or as Cindy was saying, you know, starting afresh, and how do you not carry all that history with you so that you're constantly repeating it in every relationship? So you're, but I wasn't sure whether, and I'm not sure whether I made myself clear, because what you were saying, Cindy, is, you know, we've all got everything that we've come from to get here, this moment, and being fresh in that moment when we meet others. So kind of leaving that behind and being present. And the repetitiveness, and I'm not sure whether I understood you, Jan, because there's a certain repetition that's going on here within the group about Francesco's experience, but there's also that sort of repetition of the way we continue and maintain, and with the socialization, bringing the socialization into everyday experience and relationships.
I just noticing Susie's remark or comment I was interested in.
Do you want to read it? You want to read it out?
Me?
Well, as you are on it.
Yeah, sure. Question of gender and discussions about gender are repetitive because gender identity is political and evolving. Yeah, that's a good point. It's very political, and I think that's kind of also points to my experience of this being kind of too shallow in a way, because it's so flammable, and if we don't go into specific narratives or kind of the subtlety of things, we will keep doing this. And I notice my frustration about,
Right,
because this is too complex to
it is complex.
That was
But
my
the vulnerabilities. Yeah, Cindy,
So-
after you.
that's the sense I felt and got from you, Jan, that it's too complex and too bound up with all, you know, you can't unpick it from other, you know. Sorry, I'm
Intersectionality, Cindy, that's the best word I can think of.
Thank you. So it feels like we're scratching at the surface of something that's much bigger. Yeah. Sorry, this has been quite a long session.
And also cultural conditioning, like from country to country, like it's so many things that shapes that belief and perception.
I just
yeah, sorry,
Jan, Jan, I just you know, when I read Susie's sort of gender identity is political and evolving, and I'm thinking evolving, and then I'm, you know, I am taken back to America, and the way that we are governed, our bodies are owned by the state, really. You know, and they can decree whether or not we choose to have a baby or not, whether we choose to continue with the pregnancy. And I you know, I will never go to America until because that's not evolution, you know. So this is a real tangible sense of violation, ignoring the human female capacity for an autonomy, you know.
Thank you, Terry.
So that's a broader thing, and that's I just couldn't. Sorry, Jan, I know I interrupted you, but I was I was feeling that anger.
Yeah.
Really, I'm really really angry, on lots of different levels.
I noticed hearing your anger is a relief to hear, because it's so deeply wrong. Like it's like bringing us back to middle age or something. Like it's also speaks of the, at least for me, the whole political system, especially in America, where everybody can be bought in a way. Yeah.
So I hear your frustration, Jan, and the sheer complexity of it, but I also feel like the vulnerability, not just the complexity of, what's the expression, treading on water, walking on eggshells. Yes, I somewhat clumsy touched on gender, and I saw that at my course in 2010, like I said, it didn't go down well, and the message was, don't generalize on me, see me as a person, don't see me as a woman. That's the message I got. And I can see that I feel that today I may be doing exactly the same mistake. So I hear your frustration, but I also wonder, how do we go about it, given how much of a non-starter the whole thing is?
I'm curious about your motivation, I think, about like,
right.
Because maybe that will clarify something. Like, obviously this is an important subject for everybody, but I think, at least for me, it's hard to, I struggle with, as I was saying.
Right. It's fair enough that you want to know what makes me so passionate about it. Maybe the lack of opportunity on the topic, but I suppose my working with couples made me wonder about the historical time about after war after patriarchy. What's the next step? Is very similar to the whole woke and race thing, where don't see me as a person, don't see me as a black person, but sometimes it's no, do see me because of my race, and they acknowledging the historical trauma is being demanded. And I think Cindy was speaking about the historical trauma to women, and then with the historical trauma to the slave, and I'm hearing from people of color. There's so many degrees, but it seems to be, do see me as a black person is often the message I get. But what the message I get from women, despite the historical trauma, is do not see me as a gender, see me as a person.
I think it's because perhaps part of that, and I don't know, and I'm speaking for myself. So part of not wanting to be seen as a woman, seen as a person, is because if you see me as a woman, all that shit applies.
Right.
Perhaps.
Right.
So is it fair to say that we're actually talking about objectifying women in general? Is that the cultural? I guess that's a kind of a cultural norm to a certain degree, that we like I'm talking about how women are kind of emphasizing like objects in commercials and stuff. Is that valuable at all to reference?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I was just distracted for a moment there.
No, I'm just wondering if we're actually talking about, or to a certain degree, the cultural objectifying of the female form in, like, we see it everywhere in commercials and sex sells and like the female form and blah blah blah. Is that the? I imagine that's the part of the everything.
Oh, it's a part of the way to keep women being women. You know,
Yeah.
it's a part. It's a way of saying this is what a woman should look like.
Yeah, and that's
you know,
oppressive.
And it is oppressive, and it's extremely insulting, and it's objectifying, minimizing, denying, all of that. And you know, I grew up with less of it. I still had it, but less of it, and it's so much more pervasive now. And yeah, it's just so. Yes, you've touched on a really good point there, Jan. For me, it's another way in which society maintains that sense of who a woman is or should be.
We'll have a break in 5 minutes.
Also, going back to that, the whole the point about becoming parents, in that kind of if I objectify you as a woman, going through all these changes, that will also complicate my role as a man contributing to. I'm not sure what I'm saying right now, but I just like I'm not sure what I was trying to point out, but
No worries.
Like the mother or the goddess, you know.
yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
That
yes,
dichotomy
yes.
of you're either one or the other, and if you don't fit into either of those, who the fuck are you? What are you?
Yeah, and also how, yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to point out.
And there's that's a very Catholic kind of religious. It's not just Catholic, but that, you know, that is one. But it's the same with the Protestant faith, as far as I know. There's a slightly different, but it you know, religion has a huge role to play in this. But I you know, I don't want to move away from what you're saying, Jan.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying earlier, Cindy, that they're so complex. There's so many now. The church and the whole like religious foundation is also involved in politics, and like it's yeah. I don't know what to say. Like it's yeah. It's impossible to figure out completely without going into personal things, I think.
Perhaps
Shall we
it's
take
only embodied or it's only illustrated through the personal, the many nuances of this. So perhaps that's the only way we can somehow give it a picture, because it is too big. I don't know.
But like the problems in the world, you know, it's so huge, the things that are going on, and you know, in a sense, it's a sort of an externalization of the issues that we have inside. I don't know whether I'm trying the embodiment of all that mess in ourselves. And it's too big to sort of hold in any consistent, focused way. For me, anyway. I think that's kind of, I don't know, trying to, is that what you were saying, Jan? That it's too big?
Yeah, it's complex, but so maybe it's valuable, I'm not sure, but to kind of go back to the where you come from energy-wise, like
remember we have a couple of minutes, Jan.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add this for me, like bring it more simply into where you come from when you interact. I can interact from like more assertive, directive, masculine, and women can do that too. Like I think I just needed to simplify the whole complexity and everything like moving. In order, like that's why I wanted to get back to the perspective of energy. Yeah.
I suppose my learning from this talk is that perhaps naming it, when do relationships between men and women go wrong, might have been a better fit, because they don't need to go wrong, and most of the time they don't go wrong. And I suppose I was just picking those moments in which, in my view, gender played a part. But again, my baggage made them play a part for sure. My own baggage. So the event will end in 1 hour. So that means that we take a 15 minutes break and then we come back for 45 minutes.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Coffee time.
See you at 12.
See you momentarily ish.
So I'm aware that Jan was gonna speak next about gender differences.
Yes, we were on the break. I had this kind of realization about I guess I can call it the other side of our. I want to start by mentioning Jordan Peterson, and he has kind of become this superstar for a lot of male people. A lot of males, I can say. But and I think this superstar status is and a lot of people are saying the same, that the male role, how to be a man in this culture, is for many of us very confusing, because we have come to this break point of like, now we're not gonna just be providers. We can like just be providing for the women. So it's been a crisis of identity in relation to how to be a man in our culture. And we didn't touch upon that when we talked about marriages and couples and everything, because I think a lot of, at least for my generation, and I assume yours too, Francesco, is we have this picture of our father who's being like and something happened along the way, and women's rights was becoming more and more apparent, and that created like, oh, how can I be a man and balance this? Who am I as a man in this culture? And that has created a lot of confusion and anxiety for a lot of men out there.
Right. Maybe, and maybe not, but maybe what I experience when I bring this gender differences topic, and I feel that some women, maybe particularly if they recognize themselves as militant feminists, they want the label, they want me to acknowledge the historical trauma and to have that inform my actions. But then, like it seemed to be the case today, I'd rather be seen as a person. I much rather be seen as a person than as a woman. And I think Terry was suggesting maybe right because of that historical trauma. So maybe when I run into this, Francesco, why are you even trying to generalize? Maybe that's the reason, Jan. Yeah, because I feel confined by my role of man and confused about the boundaries of it and what constitutes it. So when a woman tells me, don't do the same with me, I'm confused. I thought we were very much stuck in the historical moment defined by men and women's definitions.
I think that's I think that's so important to acknowledge and to recognize that it's been a tremendous shift in how to be a man. That's a poor way of putting it, but the masculinity was so much easier for a generation ago because, oh, I'm gonna provide, I'm gonna like give my woman what she wants, and economically and house and all that, and suddenly we had to kind of be something else, and that's just one generation ago. Like I'm not speaking, I can't speak for every country, but I think the tendency of overlooking that is very is kind of just the half of the story in what we're talking about. If we don't bring that perspective in, it's going to be it's not going to be complete enough. That's my view, but yeah.
So this sort of shifting identity roles acknowledges both the male and the female, the difficulties being male, a man or a woman, and and everything in between. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and this is not only me saying it. It's been that's why I started to mention Jordan Peterson, because he's become a superstar about like how to live your life as a man kind of thing. It's a big phenomenon, and it points directly into the role of masculinity, how that looks like now, and just for 20 years ago, it didn't look like that. And that becomes also, if we link it back to how to be a caring man in relating to having a child, that's also in that thing. Like So it's no wonder why we're kind of not getting how we should be, because like, am I making myself clear enough?
There's
Yeah.
not a sense, you know, this whole sense of how I should be. I kind of have a bit of a, you know, there's no way you should be. I think, you know, there's a lot of obfuscation and like going down a level. I mean, with all the history and acknowledging that men now are aware of women's history and what's happened, it's a bit like, it's not like how to be a man, it's like how to be who I am, or how to be me in this world that is full of snares and traps and illusions and misconceptions and misunderstandings. It's like going down that level to find out who you are and what you want from life and what you want to be, you know, in terms of your identity. It may be, I guess it's sort of working with transgender and gender fluid. It's not really about being a man, it's about being who you are, the best person you want, you know, finding the best person that you think you are or want to be.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm not sure if I'm following, because I think that's also like, I think that's definitely the case, that's but in that mix, how to be me is also what's the word, like historical heritage that's rapidly have shifted into, so like it's just the same as for women before you kind of got more influence in society. It's kind of the I think I'm just speaking for, I just wanted to bring this in because it's so easy to overlook in talking about the gender dynamics.
Mm.
I think I'm kind of standing up for a lot of men who are maybe is not into self-development either. We're topping the suicide statistics and like meaninglessness and depression and like addictions and everything, and that's a reason for that. And I think the rapid change of how can I be a man, valuable and an attractive man in this culture is a big part of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think Susie mentioned something about the patriarchy basically fucks everyone over, male or female. There's a sort of an entrapment there. And with this shifting sense of identity, what I'm hearing from you, Jan, is that sort of how do I be who I am today with these fresh expectations when it used to be like this, and now you know it's a new territory.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think like I've never thought about this in kind of in this context like I just mentioned, but I know that what self-development has brought me is so much more confidence in relating to women in general, because I can be fluid enough and but it's kind of a like it's not the majority, I think, that's into self-development. I don't think so, but that may be an assumption.
Susie is saying talk about Peter Schmidt saying we should restart from scratch from the subjective as opposed to group identities. Correct, I suppose we are acknowledging that the status quo, there's a lot of group identities, things going on. But I would like to get your invitation, right? Because for me, what comes up is the dynamic between oppressor and oppressed, and the historical trauma the oppressors have infringed on the oppressed. I'm generalizing because I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about race, I'm talking about class. But because I'm a white male, the only place where I see myself as the oppressed is class. Because both my parents came from Sardinia, Catholic, poor background. So the only time I get defensive when Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray talk about conservative, them being white men from the middle upper class classes, when they talk about conservative ideas and the revive of men, I get defensive when Douglas Murray talks about, with his very posh English accent, how difficult it is for men. I get defensive because I feel like, you've had a hard time for half an hour, as a posh white man, and you're already so outraged. And I suppose that helps me understanding how a black man might see me when I was like, well, yeah, okay, you had it's been a difficult time for a white man, yes, recently, but nothing comparing to what happened to, to the slaves and the patriarchy, what the patriarchy did on women.
But hold on a moment. I don't think that men, white men haven't suffered. We had class up until we had a serf system here, which was basically the same. We had, if you were a poor man, you had nothing. You were oppressed. There was no way they could hang you for stealing a loaf of bread for your family. We're not. What I'm trying to say is we've all had traumas. So what I think is it's like we acknowledge those traumas, but how do we move on from here? Because if we're still if we're so stuck in shame from what we've done to other people, how are we gonna progress? How are we gonna become ourselves, our true selves, our liberated selves, ourselves that we should have been way back when, if we're still kind of like touching on eggshells about what we've done to others, and that's not to ignore it, but it's to encompass it and acknowledge it, but I don't know, it's like we can get stuck in these arguments and this happened, that happened, that, of course, there's no end to that. It could go on till humanity first started. Believe me, we've been capable of it since day one, when we emerged from the sulfur.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we go forward with this?
Right. But this conversation is difficult because of the trauma. You said it yourself, Terry, and you weren't sure. You said maybe my defensiveness around, or my objection around you considering me as a woman as opposed to a person, maybe that's because of the historical trauma.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean to say I need to shut you down or ignore what you're saying or defend against what you're saying. It's like being open to that and say, well, come on then. Tell me what you really think. It's difficult to
be open. Isn't it difficult to be open to the conversation?
Well, we've been talking, we talked about that in the last group. Do you trust me not to be so mortally wounded that I'm going to say, oh, go away, never speak to me again? You're wrong, you're bad, you've upset me, you're a misogynist, go. I'm not going to do that. There's nothing to be gained from that. Not for me and not from you.
Sorry. I just like
I was getting
I noticed the obviousness of how flammable or potent this is. So I guess for me I need to slow down because this is, yeah, I just want to, this is I feel like this is starting to not be constructive. At least for me, that's my experience.
What's not constructive, Jan?
No, I think that like we're thoroughly engaged. I don't, it's so much to grasp. There's so many things there. And if maybe if we zoom out, like this is also part of the economic system and capitalism and everything. And I feel like this is
Oh, I guess you want to make justice to the conversation, and you seem to get a bit deflated when you are faced with the sheer complexity and ramifications of everything. It makes our conversation appear somewhat futile.
yeah, I think maybe the only, yeah, you're right about that, Francesco.
But
and
it's not.
also I want to say like that I think
But you need to start somewhere, right?
the word, the word trauma is maybe the most valuable, or like maybe not most, but it's a adequate frame for what we're kind of trying to point at or something. Because we're, like you were saying, Terry, we're all traumatized in a way, but also I want to, it's so easy to become politically correct, and I think that was also something like, it's almost, I think it's not allowed to talk about, that's only my perception, but to talk about the trauma for the middle-aged white male. If we say that, like, people will be furious, I think. I know there's a part of me that's kind of scared of like publishing this, and so people might hear that there's actually a thing that yeah, I'm not sure, but
yes,
and I welcome what you said, Jan. I absolutely welcome it, because trauma exists in different capacities, and I think one of the things is to actually suddenly become aware of the injustices that have been perpetrated, and to be labelled as a white male is like you know, that's a label that is really too hard to bear.
Yeah.
Because you're not a white male, you're many more things than that, and you aren't the same as Francesco, you aren't the same as other people, and that is that labeling and objectifying you as
like exactly, objectifying is the similar kind of objectifying as for women to only be perceived as women. It's no difference. Like,
yes, yes, that experience of feeling objectified as a man, and whether you are performing your role adequately. But this, I was once in a self-development group, and with none of you. The group was not organized by me, but there was a very eye-opening conversation for me from two lesbians that shared a very touching, very moving story of, you know, being spat in the face a number of times in the, you know, the teenage years and 20s, whenever they kiss their girlfriend, and that led to them wanting a label. So once you, and I suppose Susie was asking me, Francesca, what did you mean by militant feminist? Did I mean first wave feminist? No, I meant any feminist that want to be seen as a woman as well as a person. And these two lesbians wanted to be seen as lesbians as well as a person. So some people, and some Black people from the woke movement, want to be seen as Black and recognize their Blackness as well as the personhood. But there are also women, homosexual people, and what was the third one? Sorry, that don't want that. They don't want the label. That's the last thing I want. They want to be seen as a person. But to me, is the more I feel I've been traumatized profoundly, unjustly, because of my difference, the more I would like my category to be protected. And like I said before, the only category I identify with, and the only category where I go into my victim self, is the working class one. That's where I struggle to empathize with the posh person telling me about how good it is to be conservative.
That's interesting because, you know, there's that cultural oppression in that. But actually what we're doing is we're saying anyone with a posh accent has no right to feel traumatized. They have no right to feel they have been hurt in any way because they have been, you know, they've lived with a silver spoon in their mouth. Therefore, they've got no right to complain about anything. So in other words, they're not allowed to empathize with the person that suffered because how would they know? But actually, you know, what is empathy if we don't allow the fact that we can be in very different positions in life? I can be a woman and you can be a man, and I can empathize with you being a man. You can empathize with me being a woman. So what are we? There's a confusion around what we're saying, and I don't know. I just think, you know, the only way I can still say connected to myself is to try and lose the obfuscation that comes from all of this, because I'm a woman. I happen to be a white woman, and that carries an awful lot of shame in some respects, because I'm white. But does that mean there's a scale of how, okay, what are we going to compare? How much people have suffered? Yeah, we're going to say, well, you haven't suffered enough, so you can't understand me. And that isn't to invalidate, and I in no means, and that might sound like I'm sort of ignoring the different levels of trauma that people have suffered. But it's
Susie's. Sorry, sir. Terry, you finished that.
No, I finished.
Susie is saying that for me is a difference between the cognitive and the emotional. Underlying this discussion is the emotional for me. So that seems to tie in with what you're saying. Is like on a rational level, cognitive level, I'm with you, Terry. Are we gonna compare? Yeah. But on an emotional level, when the two lesbians share the story of being spat in the face because of their diversity repeated times, then the emotional comes into the mix.
Yeah, of course it will. Because that makes us feel. That's when our sensitivity is alerted and we can recognize injustice. I remember a Somalian woman telling me a story about them being spat in the face and chanted out when they moved to a particular area where they lived. And I can't remember anything feeling so painful to hear. And so, it moved me very deeply.
Mhm.
And that's what made me think, that's what opened my eyes, the emotional connection to that injustice behavior. That's what that emotional thing was, what started me, I think, to connect to what it might be like to be Black or other. It's that's the emotion. If we can feel that, then we've got a chance to understand and to empathize and to recognize that as for what it is, which is.
And also in that, as you're saying, like we can all feel the burden of something, and if we're not acknowledging each other's burdens,
Right.
whatever the burden is,
Right.
we're not able to emphasize. If we're not acknowledging our own burden, we have to talk about this as a common phenomenon, or else we're going to compare ourselves. Oh no, you feel more pain than me, or I feel like that doesn't bring anything back together. It doesn't heal anything if we're coming with that labeling and the political correctness. We all have burdens to carry, and that's
Yes.
kind of, I wanted to bring also this back to the self-development perspective of being vulnerable and maybe unburden some of the burdens we all carry from a personal level, from a historical level, and I'm also very passionate about internal family systems that they have the notion of burden. It's very helpful, at least it has been for me. I think I just want to acknowledge that and bring, because I noticed my activation level is became too high at the point, so I'm trying to take care of me, also feeling very engaged, of course, but yeah.
Acknowledging each other's traumas. That is a very profound one. I guess sometimes there's a sense of entitlement gets in the way. I think you hurt me more than I hurt you.
Yeah.
I definitely talking from my own experience of how that has played a part in my interpersonal relationships, in my life.
Yeah, for me too.
There's something I'd like to bring, and it shifts the attention away from trauma slightly, but for me it's been sort of sitting there as something unsaid, and that is my pleasure in the otherness of the masculine as well, and the difficulty in sometimes how that gets received or expressed, or how I express it in such a sort of so if I talk about if we go back to this idea of energy, when I'm aware of what feels to me like male energy, I notice it as different from my own, and sometimes that's a great joy to me to celebrate that and to meet that and to feel the wonder in meeting male energy, because it's I have male energy, but I'm not without stating the bleeding obvious, you know, so when, so I think you said, Francesco, and you, Terry, something about, there was something about wanting to be seen as a person, and yet some people want to be seen as a lesbian person, or, you know, all of those, the label becomes important.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something around, I also don't want to lose my sense of being female and being joyful about that, and also celebrating what I encounter in the masculine, in the other as well. So there's something about the joy in it too. I don't know.
I have a longing for a more spontaneous being a man and my masculinity around the woman and her femininity. Yes, I definitely have a longing for that.
Yeah. But it's confused, isn't it, by all these sort of these identities. It sort of muddies it. It muddies just that. In my experience, those energies are muddied by expectation and objectification, and our backstory, you know, and the trauma as well. Sort of puts a barrier to the meeting in any kind of real sense.
And I think it felt like you put us right back into what is group work is about, can be about, the opportunities to explore different kinds of energies, and being willing to try to articulate it and everything. I think I felt like this wholeness of listening to you right now, Cindy. It felt very complete for me.
We're coming towards the end. We have 6 minutes left, and I know that Susie shared something really personal. I'm not too sure. I'm not gonna read it out, but something I feel very moved by. I did read those experiences she shared, and so I suppose I'm already feeling in the mood of expressing my gratefulness to all of you, because it's been a very, very enriching conversation for me. And I'm even feeling more grateful for the fact that you didn't mind my wish for this to be recorded. And so I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah, it was great to participate in this. It was very engaging and great experience. Thank you for this, Francesco.
I've really enjoyed everybody here today. I really have. It's really been nice, and I hope we can continue this discussion, because it seems like there's a lot more to be said, and there's a lot more different ways that we can explore this, subjectively, generally. I don't know. I've just really appreciated being here. And I forgot that we were recording this.
I did too, Terry. That's when I realized that it was so engaging for me that I realized I'd stopped sort of having it in the back of my mind that we're being recorded. It's been a tremendous experience, and just sort of hearing and listening, and I feel deeply enriched by this experience, and for being in contact with this group. It's been yeah, a really beautiful experience. Thank you so much for orchestrating this, Francesco. Yeah, it's great.
I suppose I want to share one. I think, Jan, I really appreciate it each and every time you ask me, Francesco, what's the motivating factor for you to put these things together and for your efforts in doing that? Just became aware of another motivating factor being how we talked about theory in groups, and that sometimes didn't go down well because of the nature of the groups, because of the preferences of some of the individuals in the group. So I really had an appetite for something that was from the outset about theory and process and reflection. But I suppose we couldn't help, you know, we didn't approach the subject just cognitively. It felt really lived, so very alive.
That's how
I'm
I
really
think about theory, Francesco, through my lived experience, rather than labeling it with, you know, it's kind of in there and it underpins it, or rather it resonates with my belief system about who I am in the world. But I was talking theory, but with my heart, I guess.
I'm really
It's very
sorry I
engaging.
missed the first session today. I really am sorry. I'm really interested in that the group. Yeah, I'm sorry that I missed it. I would have really liked to have been there.
Next time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a blessed Sunday.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye.
Susie, as well.
Yeah, bye, Susie.
Yeah, Susie. Yeah, thank you, Susie.
Bye. Thank you. I've loved it. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.